Welcome to an introduction to educational research. The video today is functions of and types of educational research, and we will be talking about the different functions. That's one of the lesson objectives, is to describe and discuss the different functions of basic research, applied, evaluation, and action research. Another one is to present an overview of the different various types of research. And then finally, to discuss two very distinct and different research paradigms referred to as qualitative research methodologies and quantitative research methodologies. Well, let's take a look at basic research. Basic research is research that's done purely for the sake of doing research, creating new theories, exploring new information. And it's your typical horn-rimmed glasses, white lab coat scientists in laboratories watching rats run around mazes and things like that. Again, it's research for research's sake. And another big part of basic research is research and development. In other words, developing new products or new software or new techniques. And that's all part of basic research. You can see the cartoon there. I was just rubbing sticks together for fun. I didn't realize I was doing basic research. Some good examples of basic researchers were B.F. Skinner and his reinforcement theories about learning, and also the work of Piaget on the cognitive development of young children. These were basic research. They were developing theories, and that was the main idea of the basic research. The next type of research is applied research. And what applied research does is it takes theories that were developed by basic researchers and it tests them out in a real life situation in applied settings. And it supplies data that supports or guides or revises theories developed by basic researchers. It's designed to solve current educational problems, and it takes a close look at what actually works and what doesn't work. This theory says so-and-so. Does it actually work in schools or in classrooms? And you can see the comparison below the graphic between basic research done for intellectual pleasure of learning and mainly concerned with generalizations and with the formulation of a theory, and applied research is done to test out these theories in the field to achieve a better validity. And its aim is at finding a solution for an immediate problem facing a society. So that's basic and applied research. Basic is research done for the sake of doing research and creating theories, developing new ideas, new theories. Applied research is taking these theories and putting them actually into an applied setting and see how they work. A third function of research is evaluation. And of course, evaluation research is interested in making decisions about the quality and the effectiveness or the value of educational programs or products or practices. And again, the focus is on making decisions about effectiveness. It's not interested in the development of new knowledge or new theories, or it's looking at how do we evaluate what is going on. And of course, there would be formative evaluation, which would consist of monitoring the ongoing progress of some kind of a program or product or practice. And there would be a summative evaluation, which is judging the overall impact of a program, a product, or a practice. How well did this program work? So that's evaluation. And finally, we have action research. And action research, by the way, pages 14 to 28 in your textbook covers action research very nicely. Very nice in-depth explanation. So action research uses scientific research methodology to examine local problems or issues. So it's interested in teachers doing research for themselves, trying to create a research structure within your own classroom to solve a local problem within your own classroom. So it becomes a systematic inquiry into your own teaching. Now, there are many, many different models of action research, and when you read chapter 1 in your text, you'll see quite a few of them presented to you. But they all follow the basic steps that are in the graphic. So you can see in the middle it says start, and it says whenever you are in the cycle. So you come up, let's say you come up with a plan. You look forward and prepare to act thoughtfully. Then you act. You conduct your investigation. You observe what's going on during your investigation. And then you reflect on what's happened. What does it mean? And then you go back to plan again. So it's a cycle, a continuous cycle. And again, action research is not designed to create new knowledge and generalize new theories. It's there to serve you as a researcher in your classroom or in your school or in your district. So those are the 4 functions of educational research. Basic research, which is theory building, creating new theories, new knowledge. Applied research, which is taking the theories that have been developed and putting them in an applied setting to see if they actually work. Evaluation research, which is interested in monitoring how effective an ongoing practice is or how effective an ongoing practice was, so formative and summative. And then action research, which is research done by teachers for teachers using systematic scientific method that can apply within the context of your classroom. Those are the 4 functions of research. Now we're going to take a look at the 2 major paradigms in types of research. You can see on your screen on the left side, it says the quantitative research methodologies, and on the right side, qualitative research methodologies. And these are 2 very, very different ways or very different paradigms and different techniques and strategies and methodologies on how to answer research questions. Now, on the quantitative side, quantitative research methodologies work from a sort of a top-down framework. Top-down framework. And you can see in your textbook on page 10, there's a very good graphic. So quantitative research methodologies start out with a theory, and from that theory, a hypothesis is developed. And so then researchers institute a plan to collect data to examine that hypothesis, and then they either confirm, they accept, or they reject that hypothesis. So it starts out with the theory, then a hypothesis, collecting data, and then rejecting or confirming that. Now, we read a research article about prompting bar patrons with signs to take free condoms. That was a quantitative research methodology. Now, it didn't start out with a big general theory, although it was in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, so I guess the theoretical underpinning was the applied behavior analysis techniques that were involved. And there was a hypothesis, and my hypothesis was that if we prompted bar patrons with signs to take free condoms, that they would take free condoms more than if there were no signs. And then there was data collection. Data was collected, and then the researchers examined the data, and they confirmed the hypothesis that yes, they agreed when signs were present, more condoms were taken. So that's a quantitative research methodology. That's a scientific study using quantitative methods. And the other thing, quantitative methods, they are designed to, you can see here, theory testing. They're designed to predict and establish facts and test hypotheses. And the focus of their research methodology is to isolate variables, control as many factors as you can. If you can, use large samples. It generally is anonymous to the participants. In other words, the researchers are not really involved in the participants. They may set up the research plan and carry out the research plan, but they're not involved in it. And it collects data using tests or formal instruments or ways of measuring to collect their data. There's a research plan in the quantitative research methodologies that's developed before the study has even initiated. So in other words, the researchers have a plan already in place. This is our plan. We're going to do this. This is how we're going to collect our data. Once we collect our data, this is how we're going to analyze our data. So there is a very clear and sort of rigid plan. And data analysis in quantitative research methodologies is generally in terms of statistics, either descriptive statistics or inferential statistics. So those are sort of the characteristics of the quantitative research methodologies. Its approach, sort of top-down, theory, hypothesis, a plan to collect data, and then we either confirm, accept, or reject. The purpose is to test the theories, be able to control and predict what's going to happen. The focus is on isolating variables, controlling, manipulating the independent variable. You'll hear that expression a lot throughout this class. And it's developed and structured, and the research process is laid out totally prior to doing the research, and the data is reported in terms of statistics, either descriptive or inferential. And again, the Bar Patron article that we read is a very good example of a quantitative research methodology. Now, qualitative research methodology is a very, very different way of looking at things. I'm going to go on a tangent here a little bit and give you a little story. There was a gentleman named Lord Humphreys in the 1970s who was an Episcopal minister in the Chicago area. And he had a congregation where a large part of his congregation was a gay population. And so he became very interested in counseling and working with individuals who are identified, who self-identify as homosexuals. And they were being mistreated at that time. Now, this is back in the 70s. So he became aware through his congregation that there was sort of an unusual phenomenon that went on. Gay and bisexual and heterosexual men would meet in public restrooms for homosexual encounters. And this became a very interesting phenomenon for him. And he actually was in the doctoral program, and he decided to do his dissertation on this. He wanted to find out more about this. Well, how would you go about studying this? Well, if you wanted to use quantitative research methodologies, you'd have to come up with some kind of a survey or a questionnaire or some way of collecting data that way. And that probably would not be a very good, reliable way of doing it, because you probably would not get many people that would be willing to sit down and discuss this kind of behavior. So what he did is he used total qualitative research methodology, a qualitative research methodology. Now, if you look at the approach to qualitative, it starts out with observations. And there are many, many observations of the phenomenon that take place. And then the data that's collected from the observations are examined for patterns that might arise. And then tentative hypotheses may form out of these patterns that arise, and then a theory may develop. So it's approaching totally the other way. It's from the bottom up. So what Humphreys did is one of the things he found out that is for a homosexual interaction to happen in a public bathroom, there needed to be 3 people present, not 2. And one person was called the watch queen. That was the gay slang for the term. And this was the person who was on the lookout and could warn the other 2 participants if someone was coming. And so Humphreys spent 2 years in public bathrooms in the Chicago area collecting detailed field notes and diagrams of this phenomenon, and came up with some very interesting discoveries. And actually some theories came out of it, and some unique characteristics came out of it. One of the things was that these interactions took place with no talking whatsoever, purely eye contact and hand gestures, no talking whatsoever. One of the major findings that he came up with is that the homosexual community is not a threat to anyone. And so police became very interested in his findings, because then they realized that homosexuality may be a victimless crime, and they were not then just going around locking up homosexuals just because they were homosexuals. Anyway, interesting study, but my point is this: the methodology that Humphreys used was totally different than the quantitative methodology. So it worked from the bottom up, started out with 2 years of observations, and then going over all of his notes and having some things boil up so tentative hypotheses were formed, and then a theory developed. Now, the purpose of the qualitative is to describe multiple realities and to develop a very deep understanding and capturing the everyday life and humans and the human perspective. The focus examines full content and the researcher interacts with the participants. In this case, Humphreys would actually serve the purpose. He was the watch person. And data is collected face to face. There is no structured research plan like there is in the quantitative methodology. There is a vague outline sort of, and the research plan develops and evolves as the research goes on, and the researcher learns more about what is going on. So it's very flexible. And data analysis is mainly interpretive, descriptive, and extensive narratives. So Humphreys' dissertation became a book called The Tea Room Trade. Tea room back in those days, urination was referred to as tea. And so the tea room would be the bathroom or the public bathroom. So The Tea Room Trade was the name of the book. Fascinating read. Okay, but the point is to point out the distinction between quantitative research methodologies and qualitative research methodologies. And when you read your chapter 1, you will read more about that. Now, let's take a look at the different types of research. All right, here we have types of educational research. We have the quantitative research methodologies here. We have the qualitative research methodologies on this side. Under the quantitative research methodologies, we have what's referred to as experimental research and non-experimental research. Under experimental research, we have true experimental research, quasi-experimental, pre-experimental, and then we have a series of research designs that are called single case designs. And these are ABA and multiple baseline, multiple probe, changing criteria, and multi-element. Now, there will be videos on all of these, so don't worry about memorizing them now. Just get a general sense. And then we have non-experimental, and we have descriptive, correlational, and causal comparative. So all of these are considered quantitative research methodologies. So let's take a look at experimental. Now, true experimental research is the only type of research that can establish a cause and effect relationship. True experimental research. Now, the distinguishing characteristics of true experimental research. Random assignment of participants to groups. So usually you have a control group and an experimental group, and individuals are randomly assigned to those groups. That means that every individual has exactly the same chance or probability of being assigned to the control group or the experimental group. That's extremely, extremely important in true experimental research. The other major identifying characteristic is the researcher has control over manipulating the treatment, or what's referred to as the independent variable. And don't worry about the terminology. You'll get plenty of instruction on independent variables and dependent variables and manipulations and all kinds of things like that. But for now, the two major distinguishing characteristics of true experimental research is random assignment to groups and the researcher being able to determine which group gets the treatment and which group does not get the treatment. Now, the independent variable is the cause in a cause and effect relationship, or it's the treatment, and it's under the researcher's control. Again, this is under the quantitative research methodology. The dependent variable is the effect, or the variable of interest, or what the data is collected on. And again, since it's experimental research, results are reported using descriptive or inferential statistics. That's part of the quantitative research methodology. There's the concept of statistical significance, and we won't go into that right now, but we will go into it later on in other videos. And the results of this kind of research are reported in probability statements and confidence intervals. I think a thing we need to keep in mind is research does not prove anything. It doesn't prove anything. Research makes probability statements. Probability. We can be 95% sure that behavior X was caused by treatment Y. So it's no proof, but it's a probability statement. That's true experimental research. Now we'll take a look at quasi-experimental research. Many times, especially in school settings and in education, it's not possible to randomly assign individual students to groups. So maybe researchers have to work with existing groups. Like you might not be able to randomly assign 6th grade students to a group. You can't pull them out of their class and this and that, but you may be able to use 2 classes or 3 classes. Well, this creates a problem in terms of true experimental research because it's not random assignment. So researchers have to use existing groups. And of course, one of the major problems with that is that if the groups are not equivalent, then the findings can be somewhat sketchy. So quasi-experimental research is very good research, but it is not the gold of the coin. It's not the, what did I want to say? It's not the best that there is. True experimental research is the best. Quasi would be second best. And then we have the least, which is pre-experimental designs. And this would be something that's like a one-shot case study. You have a group, you expose them to a treatment, and you give them a post-test. And you see how they, and if they improve, you can say, well, okay, maybe the treatment was, but you have to be very careful. So pre-experimental is the weakest of the experimental ones. And then you have a one-group pre-test and post-test. So you have a group, you give them a pre-test. There's a treatment, then you give them a post-test. Or you have 2 groups, one receives a treatment, one is a control group that doesn't receive a treatment, and you give both of them a post-test. So these are very weak designs, and they have many, many threats to internal validity. However, in terms of a classroom, your individual classroom, They may be very workable and they may be very good. Okay, now let's take a look at what referred to are single case designs. And there are a whole series of them here, which there are videos on, which you will see. But I'm not going to go through each of these individually. But single case designs, there are many times when group experimental designs may not be possible or may not even be practical. One thing is, how ethical is it to withhold treatment from a group? This may be unethical. If you have a true experimental design, you're going to have a control group and a treatment group. The treatment group gets the treatment, the control group gets nothing, or just the usual way. Well, how ethical is it that the control group may be getting no treatment? Another reason for single case designs is sometimes their sample sizes are way too small. If we wanted to do some research on, let's say, individuals with spina bifida in the public school system in Northern California, well, there are not going to be a great many individuals with spina bifida in Northern California that we could create a large sample and then randomly assign some students with spinal bifida to a treatment and some to a control group. And then the third reason why single case designs have been established is their emphasis is usually more on their therapeutic impact. And they're not interested in contributing to basic research. And the other defining characteristic is participants in single case designs serve as their own control group. And that'll be explained when we go over single case designs. Okay, so that's the experimental side. Then we have the non-experimental side where we have descriptive research. Now, descriptive research describes something. It's like taking a photograph of what's going on right now. When I was at the university on the East Coast, back on the East Coast, I did a study of the verbal interaction patterns of professors of higher education at a college that I was at. And I videotaped classrooms, and I had a way of collecting data on the verbal interaction. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of it, but the thing is, what I did is I described the population and what the verbal interaction patterns of professors at that college looked like. So it was just taking a picture, a description. Correlational research looks at the co-relationship between variables. So it looks at the strength and direction of a relationship between two or more variables. And we will talk a lot about correlational research. And finally, causal comparative research. Causal comparative research is exactly the same as true experimental research, except that the researcher does not, or for ethical reasons cannot, manipulate the independent variable. Let me give you an example or two. Suppose we had a study of the effects of smoking on lung capacity of individuals over 50 years old. Well, it would be totally unethical to have a smoking group and a non-smoking group and to randomly say to people, okay, you're in the smoking group and you're in the non-smoking group. That would be totally unethical. So that kind of research, causal comparative, would have to have individuals who smoked and who didn't smoke, who were over 50 years of age, and then look at their lung capacity. So that's a little weaker. It's a little weaker than true experimental research. And okay, now on this side, we have all of the qualitative research methodologies. And they are in two categories, interactive and non-interactive. The non-interactive is historical research, and historical research is just that. It's research that's done on past events. And critical analysis, Well, that is like an expository essay on almost anything, on any theory, critiques of movies, critiques of literature, any kind of critical expository analysis of a topic. In the interactive side, we have ethnography. By the way, the research that I told you about, Lord Humphreys and the public bathrooms, that was an ethnographic study. We have phenomenologically, and that is when we're interested in what is actually the in-depth perceptions of individuals who are in this particular culture or setting. Some nice studies have been done on looking at gangs, gang behavior and functions of gangs and things like that. Then we have case study. Case study is a very, very in-depth dive into an individual or a group. Very in-depth data collection to get the perspective of that individual or that group on a certain topic. Grounded theory, pardon me, is an in-depth look at theory development and how it came about, how it arose. Okay, well, that's a really quick, probably confusing overview, but the idea here is just get a sense that there is a whole lot of different types of research and many different ways of examining a particular question or problem. And there are two distinct paradigms. There is the quantitative research methodologies, and there are the qualitative research methodologies. This works from the top down. Starts out with a theoretical underpinning, hypotheses, then a plan and data collection, data analysis, and then either confirming or rejecting the hypothesis. So it's from the top down. This starts from the bottom up. Whole bunch of different kinds of observations. The researcher is involved in the research process. Tons and tons of field notes, and then field notes are examined and looking for categories or trends, and as these categories and trends come up, then some tentative hypotheses may develop, and then out of that, as those hypotheses are examined, a theory may develop. So this is from the bottom up. Well, okay, so now it's your turn. Now the assignment that I've sent out, assignment number 1, has all of these well, actually, no, it doesn't have the questions in it. So here, so below and on the next screen are a series of questions for you to respond to. And I'm asking you to add this assignment to the Word document that you've created for assignment number 1. So here, a function of this type of research is theory generation. Well, is that basic research? Is that applied? Is that evaluative? Or is that action research? So you put A, B, C, or D. So to each one of these, just type out the prompt and then put your response. And then the second part of your assignment is very similar, except here you read each of the prompts and respond, is it a representative of quantitative research methodologies or qualitative research methodologies? So A or B. And you add this to the document you've created for assignment number 1. If you're interested in where the material may came from this, here is the well, that's it. Thank you very much. This is Functions and Types of Educational Research. See you in the next video.